Welcome to the Grow Room, a space where we cultivate consciousness through stories that take us higher. We're sharing inspiring stories from a diverse range of guests, shining a light on their journey, the impetus, the challenges, the growth, and the rewards, all through the lens of the cannabis growth cycle. And we're here today with Boyuan Gao, a cultural strategist, equity designer, and futurist with a career that has spanned organizations that impact youth development and juvenile justice, HIV and AIDS, homelessness and environmental justice, music, journalism, digital media, technology, women's entrepreneurship. She does it all. So also this all kind of culminated, and she became the co-founder and principal of Project Inkblot, Design for Diversity consultancy, which partners with companies to create equitable products, services, content, and experiences. She's also an executive producer and creator of Fit the Description, a docuseries exploring the nuances of race, identity, and policing. And I am super excited to share a story with all of you. Boyuan, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. That was a mouthful. Yeah.
There's so much to say. I had to even narrow it down. I'm like, how do I even choose, right?
Thanks. You
But
make me sound so impressive.
you are impressive. I didn't have to work too hard. So,
Thanks.
where are you calling in from today? Where are you at?
I'm in Western Mass, which is where I grew up. I lived in New York for the past 15 years, about in Brooklyn, and I just moved back here.
Yeah, no.
For COVID too, so the timing was perfect.
Yeah, seriously, that's definitely a very good time to be out of the city for sure. So you grew up in Western Massachusetts, all right, and now that you are back there, you kind of have a new appreciation for it from like first when you were there growing up. I feel like that's always like the cycle of like you want to get out of your hometown, especially to like go to somewhere like NYC, right? And then you're living that life, and it gets exhausting, right? Then it's nice to kind of go back and have a little bit of a respite, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, lots of nature here. So
Yeah,
I'm sure
it's the
similar to
best.
you.
Yep, definitely. It's so nice, like we were saying, especially now when it's you're kind of you can't go out and enjoy everything the city has to offer anyway. It's definitely better to be in a place where at least you can enjoy nature and have your space and enjoy that. So that's awesome. I'm glad that you are staying safe and staying grounded out there. So let's
Yeah.
dig in, right? So let's take a journey through the growth cycle that has led you to where you are today. And that all starts with planting the seed, right? So that is the first step in your journey. It is hearing your soul's calling and actually listening. And a big part of that is embracing the unknown, right? When a seed is planted, it's can feel like it's being buried, right? It feels
Mhm.
dark and alone, and there's always has to be this trust in a bigger process that is about to take place, right? And we touched
Mhm.
on it a little bit in that intro. You had a lot of different experiences, right? And take us through some of those jobs that and roles that you held, and kind of what was that like? What were those kind of how did you come about all those different fields and the different roles that you held in those fields? Take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the thing to say is that it sounds really impressive. I've done all these things, but it's not because I was trying to do it all. It just seriously was because I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. And
Right.
so I think when you're young and when I first left college, it was like, I think I need to be a community organizer or an activist. Like that seemed like the righteous thing to do, but I'm not cut out for that. And I did a lot of soul searching around that, like really wedging myself into situations that I knew was not the right thing, but I thought I had to do it.
Mhm.
So when I first moved to New York, I had no plan at all. And I my first job was at a floral wholesale for funerals in East New York, which at the time was like super grimy and industrial, and like people did not live there. It was just warehouses, right?
Right.
And I didn't know what the hell was happening, but it was really exciting. And I just met just regular folks, working class folks who were just trying to make a living. And it was like similar customers all the time. And I was like, this isn't my career by any means, but it was a good foray into the city and just getting to know communities. And then my first real job, quote unquote, like with a salary and all of that, was at a youth development organization called Urban Dove. And through that, I just did like really random stuff. I worked with middle school boys up in the South Bronx teaching basketball, like teaching life skills through basketball. And then that led me to a variety of other youth development stints, including in the juvenile detention centers throughout New York. And then I worked in environmental justice, but still through education mostly. And then I just totally took a 180 and decided, hey, I want to be a music journalist. Like I love, like all my friends were musicians or like rappers or singers. That's how I met Mary Pryor, who heads your content
Yeah.
a long time ago. And so I started writing for this culture and music magazine, which was super exciting because it was all independent artists and it really was about the culture. So it's like very to the ground. And that's where I found my love for writing and just being immersed in all of these vibrant cultures, like really the underground and subcultures of New York. And, you might be wondering, like, how did all these things come together and how the hell does that lead into what I do now? But through all of it, it's just like I got a little bit closer and a little bit closer, or I found like glimmers of things that really fueled my passion and energized me. And then there are other parts of it that sucked. It's like working at nonprofits, lots of bureaucracy, lots of politics, and also like funding issues. And then working as a journalist, there's not a whole lot of money there. And then also it was like at the transition into digital, and print was no longer the way. And that was really just, distressing for a lot of people. And from that, I moved into marketing. So I'm like, okay, how do I turn this into something that's more sustainable for me? And then from there on, I met my now collaborator, work wife, co-founder of my company, Project Inkblot, and also at the music magazine. And we just knew at that time that we wanted to do something solo, just the two of us, and like create our own thing and not work for somebody, but we didn't know what the hell that was going to be. So in terms of like planting the seed, I think it's like what you said exactly. It's, it feels dark sometimes, you feel lost. And I'm a super impatient person. So I was like waiting for the gold. I was waiting for it to bloom, and it just was not going the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah, but I think that those all these experiences, I think that even like talk about kind of just having to trust the process, even when like you said, like feeling like that seed where there's just the darkness, like you can't even see that light like to sprout through, right? But there's still is that seed is still destined for something, right? And I think that even all those kinds of odd jobs, if you want to call them that, they all do have something in common as far as like it's really immersing you in communities, all these different communities, right? That are usually the communities that are not being paid attention to enough, right? That people aren't, really speaking to or engaging with in a real way. Like, it's kind of more pandering than actually engaging and understanding and, really diving into those communities. And, even just from a floral shop, like just from where that shop was and like, serving that community and being kind of just in the mix of that to, actually working with, that youth basketball program and actually, kind of inspiring that change from within that community. And then, bringing that kind of into the marketing and the media world and everything like that. I think that, it's very clear that there's something that tied all those experiences together, right? This calling that you have at, what you are able to do as far as, bringing the culture and the, the diversity and the actual, that real work and, applying it in a framework that, is, can be kind of brought into the mainstream, right? And into that mainstream marketing world and actually be effective to speak and engage with those communities. So I think that that's, such an amazing thing that like, when you don't even know that that's why you're doing it, but like something within you knows, right? Like you're on that path for a reason, for sure. And I'm sure that all of those experiences allow you to operate now with a much clearer vision of how to communicate and how to effectively speak to all different kinds of communities, all different types of people through all different types of media and marketing, right?
I love how you synthesized that. Thank you. Yeah,
Oh,
that's awesome.
my pleasure. So what did that really kind of teach you about yourself, right? Because now we're getting into the stretch phase, right? So that is the part of your journey that here's the stretch phase of the plant. And the really amazing thing about that stretch period is the plant is getting ready. It's expanding itself for the big flowering buds that are about to come, right? It's expanding itself to carry the weight of those gifts. And that's, I think, where where we get to now, as you are going through these different experiences. And like you said, you meet, your eventual co-founder and work wife, right? So you are now expanding yourself to be able to carry this role. So what were like the really the main things that you learned about yourself through these experiences, through these different jobs and roles that you had?
Mm, that's a great question. I mean, so much of it is in the patience that I didn't have, right? So it's just like, I mean, listen, it's like the universe is going to do what it does. And like, you might think that you have a plan. And I think what I really learned from all of it was humility and patience at the end of the day. And to your point, like trust in myself. And I love the analogy that you use around plants, right? It's just like from the seeding to now we're about to come out of the ground and all of that. And you can't do that without good grounding. You can't do that without roots, right? And
Yeah.
so just like based on what you synthesized, a lot of that is I worked so much on the ground with people, and I really loved how you synthesized that, because I really do see this like growth trajectory. So much of it was like on the ground working with communities, but you can't just stay there all the time. Like some people can, but I think that for my journey, it's really about how do I amplify not just the voices of those people, but how do I bridge that gap with everybody else, right? And so a lot of that is, it's not about diversity for diversity's sake. It's really like expressing the plurality of our humanness and all of what that looks like, and how rich that is, and how rich that is for the fertile, just for things, just for everything to grow. And
Right.
yeah, I learned a lot about trusting myself, even when external forces were saying, okay, this ain't gonna work,
Right.
this is not it, get a 9 to 5, do all of that. And one thing that I skipped on the journey is that when Jahan, my business partner, and I first got together at the Music and Culture magazine, we decided to start our own thing. And as I mentioned, we just moved into digital. The whole world moved into digital. We had an online magazine called Culture Files. And that was the first time that we really started to profile people like yourself, like women founders or people of color entrepreneurs who are doing just dope stuff for their own communities, who were not getting any type of shine in mainstream media. And that was incredible. We had about like 12 contributing writers, and we interviewed the first woman Yemeni photographer, or a food justice activist in Oakland. Really just ran the gamut, and that was really fulfilling. And through that, we realized there's an opportunity to bring this in real life. There are people who want to do things like that, who don't know how to transition from a more traditional work, job, career, whatever, into their passion. Like maybe you're an accountant and you want to be a seamstress, or I don't know, or like do what you're doing, right? Like working in cannabis and like creating a business and doing all of that kind of stuff. There's so much fear. Like we're just taught so much to be fearful of that and to do the linear path, right?
Right.
So we started doing that, and that's what got us into doing consultative work with cultural institutions, because there really was a need there too. These cultural institutions at this point were not so close to the ground. They didn't know what was happening in day-to-day, everyday community culture, right? It's just
Right.
like there's this huge gap between highbrow and lowbrow. And then
Yep.
there's this other gap between agencies and communities that they knew that they had to reach, quote unquote, but didn't know
Right.
how to, right?
Yep.
So all of these things, just we're like, okay, we can codify this. We can make this accessible to people to start thinking and questioning the right things, so that they can access and create relationships and trust with communities that they're not used to developing relationships with.
Yeah, and I think that you like mentioned such an important thing, like before, like diversity for diversity's sake, right? And it's something more than that, because I think that that's something that these larger agencies want, and when you get more removed from that actually like on the ground work, that's what happens is like you said, like they kind of have these boxes to check or quotas to fill, and it's not effective at that point, because it you can tell that it's not genuine, right? You can tell that they're just
Yeah.
so far removed, and it's with a lot of different things, whether I feel like it's definitely the most prominent when it comes to diversity and like actually speaking to communities like that, but it's also just from a simple kind of um, consumer standpoint, right? So like
Mm-mm.
that's something that in our business we always are trying to, engage with the customers as much as possible, right? And obviously, like, we're not a huge company. I still have the ability as a CEO to be like speaking with our customers and actually like listening to what they want and what like is actually driving their decisions, their motivations. But we get so far removed from that in most, typical consumer packaged goods kind of industries. These people that are making the decisions are so out of touch with like what decisions people actually want made, or what people actually need, or what is motivating these people. And it does, just creates, makes that gap larger and larger, right? Like, we're always, acutely aware of the, widening gap between, the rich and the poor in this country, and like the kind of dissipation of the middle class. And I think that can kind of just be extrapolated into different situations, like, just culturally, right? We're becoming so, the difference between highbrow and lowbrow, right? Like, the gaps just keep getting wider. And, it's definitely, we need people like you to help to bridge that gap. We need these bridges in so many different ways, culturally, economically, and just, with communication, I think, more than anything, right? Because it's like, a lot of times right now, especially just with a lot of the different, discourse politically and socially, it's like speaking two different languages, right? Like, it's just, we need these kind of translators, if you will, you know what I mean, to really be the ones that are, like I said, bridging that gap. It's so important. And it's definitely, there's so much fear that is stopping, that it kind of gets people stuck in where they are, and kind of stops them from crossing that bridge, right? And it's fear from the people up top that that they're going to lose control, right? And it's fear from the people on the ground that well, I'm already in a rough position, like you're talking about. If somebody wants to transition and start their own business or something like that, there's so much fear, because it's like, well, I might not be in a great position now, but I don't want it to get worse, right? So it's like, that's such an important part of like this stretch phase for the plant, right? Because it's you have to just continue to trust and to surrender, and and you just have to kind of keep following that path and reaching up towards the sun, even though you don't really know what's to come, right? You just kind of have to keep that process of surrendering. And I think that it's really cool that you were the path that you were going down kind of just started to kind of ask those questions, and you were there to answer them, right? Like, rather than just like sitting there with the question and being like, well, this is something to ponder on, like this isn't great. Like, you were actually like, okay, well, what can we do to change it, right? And I think that brings us really nicely into the flowering stage. And this is that kind of the beauty of the journey coming to life in a tangible form, right? And it's definitely an amazing thing that you've created. And I would love for you to kind of talk about what this design for diversity and all these things, and how you apply that, and how you help these other businesses apply it in their practices as well.
Yeah, thanks. Well, still flowering, it's like that whole concept of we haven't arrived anywhere yet. I think you've drawn so many interesting concepts, because if we were just to look at nature now, and so much of our work is actually based on nature, it's like this concept of interdependence or biomimicry. Like, how do mushrooms grow? How do these small organisms collaborate in order to make things bigger? And so the whole concept of design for diversity it's a process. Like, we use process all the time and we don't think about it, especially if we're good at something. We just do it. It's like blind to us. We just close our eyes. We just do it. Right. And that's something that Jahan and I realize, is that we are these cultural bridges, but we don't want to do that for the rest of our lives. And we don't want to do that for other people, right? Like, we're experts, quote unquote, but why can't you be? Why can't anybody else be? And there are things that we can just start doing, like asking the right questions or taking a pause before we jump into strategy. We're such in this world of go, go, go. And obviously we have all these media narratives around, build things quickly, or like, go ahead and break things, or whatever that tech bro language is, right? It's like all that stuff, right? It's so pervasive that we don't even notice that it sinks into us, and it sinks into our consciousness, and it's actually cutting off our nose to spite our face. It's like all these dichotomies and these wedges and cultures that you speak of, none of them are real. They're just all illusions. They're all social constructs. They're things that we've decided upon. So why can't we redesign them, right?
Right.
Is the whole point. And so Design for Diversity looks at 5 key phases, 5 key questions. And the first one is, and you can think about this in terms of your own company. It's like thinking about who we are unlocks for us what's possible, right? So like, who are we unlocks how might we? Because that's really a question about like, how do we start doing something that we've never done before? How do we grow a business? Like whatever the strategy is, before we even get to implementing things and running to build new things, we should be considering who are we and what are our cultural defaults? What are things here that we're just going to do because we've inherited these ways of thinking and doing from popular culture, from dominant culture, and they actually don't serve us and they don't serve our consumers, right? So that's number one. And again, that's very much like borrowed from just looking at nature. And the second one is looking at, before we even think about an idea, who might we be excluding, right? And like, what would be the impact of that? So that's really like centering equity in everything that we do. So again, going back to, it's not diversity for diversity's sake. Like what you mentioned about this widening gap is not good for stakeholders. It's not good for CEOs. It's not good for anybody. It's definitely not good for a consumer, right?
Right.
So we can close that gap. And then the third piece is really looking at like, what's the worst case scenario and on whom? Like our intent is not our impact. And actually nobody cares about your intentions. That's personal to you. The impact is how it lands in the world, right? And then the fourth one is like, how do we get to the source? So that goes back to like the idea of roots and like, what's the root cause? What's the root at the end of everything? Let's not build Band-Aid solutions to things. Let's not come up with a new idea because it's on trend right now. But like, what is it actually solving? And then the fifth one is, how do we create partnerships that work? How do we create partnerships that are equitable, where I know, for instance, if we're going to collaborate on something, like what's in it for you just as much as what's in it for me? And how do we bolster each other up in that? And that shit is hard. It's not easy, right? Because like they seem simple, but that's just not how we work. Right. And so that's really at the crux of like, it's a very rudimentary, and I'm really just making it simple for people to understand. But those are 5 things that we can start with thinking about.
Yeah, and like you said, like those 5 things sound simple, but there's so much to it. And then it's also a matter of like, implementing it in such a way that, like what you were saying with like intent versus impact, it's so different because, speaking from experience, like we had like ideas as far as like, our give back initiatives and, these other kind of sustainability measures or, whatever kind of initiatives like that we are like so pumped to push. And we're like, oh my God, people are going to love this and like be so happy. And this is going to like be great. And like, it's really like gets discouraging how like few people like outwardly care. You know what I mean? Like it's like just like as an example, like on social media, our meme posts, right? Like just a funny meme or something like that will get like 500 something likes, right? Whenever we post about our nonprofit partner for the month or whatever, we're lucky if we break like 40, right? And it's just like those kinds of things. But on the other side of that coin is, I know for a fact that a lot of our customers do care about it, but it's just not something that they're actually maybe going to outwardly, like it's not going to make them like jump and buy that item right away, like maybe a sale would, right? But it's something that is like, okay, they'll know, like I think now, especially with like the younger consumers, like Gen Z, especially millennials, it's definitely more so than like baby boomers, but Gen Z, I think, is where you really see like that, conscious consumerism come to light in a way that we've never seen before. And it is just super inspiring and amazing. But it's like, how do you kind of work with companies to make them kind of understand the impact that it's having? Because it can be something that's not maybe like I said, an immediate like spike in sales, right? But it's greater customer loyalty. It's, actual, like you said, kind of reaching a new demographic. Then maybe that demographic is not going to purchase right away, but they're engaged now, right? Now they're starting to pay attention to what you're doing. And that's somebody that maybe is just top of the funnel and will get to that bottom of the funnel, in few weeks, a few months, right? So how do you kind of get companies to be like okay with that process and understand how to really judge that impact?
Yeah, that's like the $1,000,000 question, right? I
Right.
haven't cracked that nut yet because otherwise I'd be a billionaire. No, just kidding. But
I was gonna
I
say,
think the
tell me.
key is well, I think part of it is that, like, with Tonic, for instance, you're a woman-owned business and you've hired really brilliant people and y'all are futurists. Like, I call myself a futurist. You're thinking about the future. You just mentioned Gen Z. They are the future. So you already have your mindset on that, right? And you can't convince everybody. There are a lot of companies that don't want to change. They're afraid to change and they're going to fight tooth and nail until somebody tells them that they have to because everybody else
Right.
has. And like,
Mhm.
I'm not in the business of convincing them because it's just not worth my time. Right.
Right.
And it's
Yep.
also not worth my time to convince people that diversity matters. Like, I don't even care about that. It's like, okay, yeah, diversity is the right thing to do. You should do that. Like, I hate that conversation. I don't even like the term diversity. It's like, it makes me cringe, right? So if you were to tell me that there's like some huge diversity conference or event, like, I'm not going to go to that because that sounds boring as hell. So part of it is like the thing that we're working on and that we provide companies is a way to do cultural strategy. We're not doing diversity work because one of the things that I like to say is that diversity is a metric. It's just a measurement for whether or not equity is there. So once diversity becomes the activity and the goal, we're in trouble. It's just like what you said, it becomes a checkbox. That becomes what all the money and efforts are towards. And actually nobody cares about it because they know it's not going to work anyway. Right? Like if you were invited into an all male, old white male company and they just hired you and hired, I don't know, like 2 other women, that's not going to change the culture of it, right? It's not going to
Right.
solve the root, again, the root cause, like what the
Hmm.
real issue is. And so I'm not interested in that. So back to your question about how do you convince companies to do what you're doing. And one thing that I wanted to loop back around is maybe you're only getting 40 likes on some of those posts that are more like socially, conscious or aware posts. But at the end of the day, it's exactly what you said about it shows your integrity. It shows it's going to provide a level of brand loyalty. Those are the people that are going to be your ride or dies for as long as your company is around. And that's more important. You're going to get more sales and more support and everything that you need from just those 40 people than the hundreds who are liking a jokey meme,
Right.
right?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. And that's, I think, super important because there's so much choice for consumers now, right? That like you have to
Mhm.
have these grounding tenets that are going to really show people what you're made of because there is so much choice. Like, it's those different ways that you can stand out. And I think that, you are really like you said, like as far as being a futurist, you know what I mean? You're already ahead of kind of what companies need, whether they know it or not. And I think it's really, really cool, like the design for diversity framework that you've created. Because like you said, you don't want to be the one that has to like go through this like list with people for forever and kind of continuing to be that, translator, but to actually
Yeah.
be able to create a tool that companies can implement on their own and kind of like an internal kind of checklist, but really more of like an operational framework is really something that's so amazing. And I think that's when we talk about flowering and being able to kind of harvest that flower and share your gift, I think that's like the perfect way to do that, right? Is that you're creating something
Mhm.
that can now is scalable, right? Because
Mhm.
that's always the issue that you run into as a consultant or somebody that's providing a service is there's only one of you or there's you and your co-founder, you know what I mean? That's like how do you
Yeah.
and your clients, well, they want you. Well, that's like, you guys are the best. I don't want one of your associates, right? I want you. But by creating something that allows them to kind of take ownership of that process themselves and bring that in-house and have their own way to kind of check and balance their own internal systems, I think is such a powerful way to scale this impact and to actually make it
Mhm.
something that is accessible to a lot of people. Because and that's another thing is like it's just you feel like there's just like how you don't want to have to like continuously have those conversations. I'm sure that the people, these executives and everything, don't want to constantly like, oh, well, this is now this like endless loop of like, now you're just going to kind of constantly be my consultant, right? And I'm constantly going to have to pay this fee. But
Mm-hmm.
to be able to give them the tools, like show, somebody that's providing a service is there's only one of you, or there's you and your co-founder, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you,
Yeah.
and your clients, well, they want you. Well, that's like, you guys are the best. I don't want, one of your associates, right? I want you. But by creating something that allows them to kind of take ownership of that process themselves and bring that in-house and have their own way to kind of check and balance their own internal systems, I think is such a powerful way to scale this impact and to actually make it something that is accessible to a lot of people. Because, and that's another thing is like, it's just you feel like there's just like how you don't want to have to like continuously have to have those conversations. I'm sure that the people, these executives and everything don't want to constantly like, oh, well, this is now this like endless loop of like, now you're just going to kind of constantly be my consultant, right? And I'm constantly going to have to pay this fee. But to be able to give them the tools, like shows that shows a level of integrity in the system as well, right? That you're not just kind of like latching on and it's like, no, you need me forever now, right? Because I've definitely been in those situations before where I feel like, as a business owner, you're like, well, what's the end game, right? And now this is like a way, like a very, I said, scalable solution for a real issue that is facing a lot of companies. And I've spoken with other women that have been taking this approach for cannabis companies, especially because we definitely saw that kind of like it was this glimmer of hope in the kind of start of the cannabis industry when like women were holding almost 40% of the executive jobs, and now we're seeing that number just plunge as the mergers and acquisitions increase, and the kind of that corporate takeover of the cannabis industry, of course, comes with a lot of white male domination, right? And so there's a lot of women that are trying to kind of bring this consultancy into the cannabis industry and let them kind of know what the actual consumers want, because like I said, there's this disconnect. And I think that this is such a great way to to bring that across all industries. So what are some of like the highlights, if you will, of the companies that Project Inkblot has worked with, and the kinds of kind of experiences that you've had running this company that have been the most rewarding for you?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I mean, there's so many things, but I think I'll speak on one tactical thing and then one that's more personal, I guess. So a tactical thing that we did, we worked with an ad agency. They're a global ad agency. They've done like tons of huge campaigns with some of the biggest companies in the world. And we trained their whole team on design for diversity. And then we worked, well, actually during that training, the strategist came up to us and they're like, we just had an aha, like we're the gatekeepers. We're the ones who like seed really the information, the research, all of that onto the creative before we start building the thing, right? And so there are just so many opportunities for blind spots in cultural defaults, right? And then like, what's the impact of that? You're showing these ads to like millions of eyeballs, and if something goes awry, like that's not good. That's just really not good. And so we just took apart their whole entire process from like soup to nuts and just looked at what are all the gaps here? What are all the areas that we can start bringing principles of design for diversity in, and start giving you a process that you can work together as a team to start identifying some of these things. And they created this concept almost like a watch out. Like, what are some things that could be sticky areas for the public? Like, what are some areas where there might be pushback? Like, how can we see this? So it was like their version of intent versus impact, essentially. And then they're like, we actually need the client to see this. Like, we need to be briefing the client on this because they don't have a process for it. And they need to see where they can go wrong. And so they completely shifted their brief process and their brief. And that was super dope because it's like they're working on these huge campaigns with multinational corporations all over the world. And now they have a process that's their very own, that's bespoke to them and deals with all of that.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's just like you said, just being able to kind of see that, like how this can affect so many things, right? Just by being able to for their aha moment, it can now be an aha moment for so many others.
Yeah, exactly. And the other huge win, and this isn't like necessarily a client win or anything like that. But one of the things that we do in our work is, I mentioned getting to the root cause. And so there's a colleague of ours who's also a mentor who does this whole process called results-based accountability. It's too complicated. I won't get into it. But one of the things that they do, it's like creating a vision statement that is like an optimal way of being for all people, right? And you can do this for your own business. You can do one for Tonic. And we did one for us. And it was like, all people are designers, creators, and decision makers on the products and services that impact their lives. Something like that, right? And what that does is it illuminates who currently doesn't experience that. So like, what communities don't experience being leaders on the products that they consume, right? And it's like, you can just Google it real quick, right? Like, let's look at the tech industry. There are only 3% of technical workers are Black. Like, that's staggering, right? So you can just start to see what that gap is. And then as an organization, we're like, well, what can we do in our day-to-day activities as a business that addresses that root cause? And that was a huge aha for us, because it's like, yeah, there are specific things that we can do that are going to create, it's going to create better off measurements for these communities. Like, how do we ensure that these folks in particular are better off where they are? And so that just shifted the way that we think about our business. It's like, our client isn't just the business. It's also the people inside of them and the people who are impacted by what those businesses do. So how do we make sure that they're better off?
Yeah, because I guess that's a good point. Like, it's, your client, so to speak, is the business, but really you're working for the end consumer of that client, right? It's like, you want to, because that's what you want to allow the client to do, is better understand and empower that end consumer, and not just one part of the potential end user, right? Like, to be able to empower a broader range of populations to be able to engage and have like you said, kind of more ownership within like how these systems are built. And I think that the tech industry is such a like glaring example of that, whether it's a lack of Black people in it, a lack of women in it. There's just a lack of everything except for white dudes in the tech industry, right? Like, it's just like, and it's definitely like, and because tech is like the most pervasive thing in our lives right now. I mean, especially now, when we're in quarantine and everything is moved to virtual everything, it really makes you question, like, who are these systems built for? And when they're supposed to be built for literally everybody, right? Tech is not something that it's like, oh, well, classically, these are the people that no, it's literally meant for everybody, because now schooling is, it's just all very much something that should be accessible, and something that should be made for everybody. And it's just definitely when you look at the people who are constructing it, it's definitely clear that they could use a little bit of help understanding that end user, and making sure that they have a say. And I think it's super interesting, even like being upstate, and the internet access and things like high-speed internet is the access to that is very different than it is in more densely populated areas. And it's something that is coming to light a lot more now that everybody has to do their schooling from home and all of these things. It's really shining a light on how many areas within the United States, like let alone globally, just within the United States, don't have basic access to high-speed internet, which is crucial for almost everything that we do now, right? So it's like, now these things need to be addressed in such a wider way. And I think that, like you said, just kind of framing the question a little bit differently, or asking yourself this question, kind of being able to turn it inward to see how like it affects the work that you're putting out, is really beautiful. And it's like great that within your own company are kind of being able to reflect on that, and kind of even just notice that, like, oh wait, like we need to kind of broaden our scope of how we are approaching these projects, and and who we are actually serving when doing so. It's really amazing.
Thanks. Well, you said something really brilliant, which is, that example of living in a rural area or a less densely populated area and the internet access sucks. It's like, yeah, now we have to all of a sudden figure out how to deal with that solution, but it may have seemed benign when they were developing these technologies in the very beginning, but it's like, why weren't there rural people considered in the design
Right.
process, right? Or like spoken to or asked about,
Yeah.
like, what could go wrong for you where you live around these technologies, things like that. So it's like that can just be built in the very beginning. It wouldn't take that long. You would have to front load a little bit more work, but you save so much money and time and headache afterwards.
Yeah. And it's, I think, just to, yeah, framing it differently. Like, so like it's having to ask those questions in the beginning, because I think that that becomes a big part of the problem, is just the way that we are kind of structured, and the powers that be are have a very kind of rigid framework, as far, and a very capitalistic framework when it comes to how to make these decisions, and how to execute on certain things. And like you said before, it's all just cultural constructs, right? These are all social constructs. Nothing is written in law that this is the way things have to be. It's just what we've accepted. And I think that when we talk about Gen Z and thinking about the future, there's never been kind of more hope for like an actual change to this kind of yeah, this capitalistic kind of viewpoint that is pervasive in just all parts of our lives now as Americans. And I think that,
Mm.
if anything good can come from this whole, the whole pandemic and everything, is that people maybe can understand how, the downfalls of capitalism, right? And how we can benefit, maybe not going all the way to socialism, right? But there has to be a balance in between. And there's, something that we talk about kind of internally within our company is like, altruistic capitalism, right? And kind of how you can just by changing the way that you look at things and making sure that there is like this social responsibility component to what you're doing, and that you are giving back, as you are receiving. Like there is, we look at just the wealthiest people in the world and in the country, and it's just like really, really ridiculous, right? It's just like if you gave back just like a portion of that, like it could do so much, right? So just being able to kind of change
Mm-hmm.
that framework a little bit and change it from the top down, how we look at these systems. Like you said, it might be a little bit more work at first, but the difference and the impact that it can make in the long term is just something that is completely worth it, 100%. You know what I mean? That's it. You can't
Totally.
argue it, right? Yeah.
Totally.
Well, and that's, I think, a good place to end it with a bright hope, an
Yeah.
optimistic view of the future, right? But how can people find you and learn more, and see how they can work with you potentially? Let us know where can they track you down.
Cool. Well, www.projectinkblot.com is our website, and it's just at Project Inkblot on all the socials. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But yeah, reach out if you have any questions, anything like that. Always down to have a conversation.
Amazing. And Boyuan also writes amazing articles for Tonic on occasion. So check out the blog,
Oh,
because it's some of my favorite stuff that's up on there is the stuff that you have written. So thank
thank
you so
you.
much for that, and for all that you do to contribute to our message, but more so to contribute to this greater conversation, and to really influence a lot of positive change in this world. I appreciate you, and I'm grateful for all the work that you're doing and that you're going to continue to do. I'm excited to see it.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I'm such a fan of y'all's, obviously, and respect so much what you do.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.